Rancher turned away his mother, not knowing she had $1.4 million hidden in her suitcase. Carson Creek, Wyoming. 1882. Morning. The sky was the color of tin, and the wind smelled like dry earth and regret. Ella Carver pulled a battered leather suitcase down the center of the dirt road, its weight dragging behind her like a punishment. Her steps were slow but steady. She didn't glance back. On the porch of the ranch house, Jake Cartwright stood stiff as a fence post, watching her go. His wife, Amelia, stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Amelia broke the silence with a voice sharp as cut glass. "Let her go. It's time we cut the dead weight." Jake didn't respond. His hand wrapped tighter around the porch rail until the veins in his wrist stood out. He had just turned his mother out of her own home. He told himself it was time, that the ranch needed to grow, that she didn't belong anymore. But the truth sat in his chest like a stone. Ella's suitcase bounced along behind her, heavy enough to stagger her steps. Too heavy for a woman of 70. But she didn't complain. She just kept walking, head high, like someone who knew this moment would echo far beyond today. Inside that old case wasn't just threadbare clothes and yellowed papers. It was $1.4 million in cash. And by nightfall, everything Jake thought he owned would begin to slip through his fingers. Jacob Cartwright had never belonged anywhere but this land. Carson Creek ran through him like blood. He'd been born in the upstairs bedroom of the old ranch house, raised under skies so wide they swallowed sorrow, and taught to work before he could read. His father, Raymond Cartwright, was a man of few words but unshakable hands. Jake worshipped those hands, the way they knew how to break a wild colt, mend a split fence, or cradle a dying calf without flinching. When Raymond died in a stampede, Jake was only 23, a boy with calloused palms and too much silence in his bones. He buried his father with his own 2 hands, next to the cottonwood tree Ella had planted the year Jake was born. Then he went back to work. There was no time for grief, only fences to mend and cattle to feed. Through the years that followed, years of fire and flood, locusts and lean winters, Jake never left the land. He slept when he could, rode when he had to, and bled into the soil like his father before him. And always, Ella was there, a quiet presence in the kitchen window or hanging laundry on the line, humming old hymns no one else remembered. He never questioned her role on the ranch. She handled the accounts, stocked the pantry, and remembered birthdays when he forgot. She kept the house warm and the numbers straight. Then came Amelia. She arrived on the southbound stage in the spring of 1879, wearing city dresses and a smile that could sell thunder to the desert. Her father had been a banker, her mother a ghost. She said she'd come west to find air she could breathe and a man worth trusting. Jake fell faster than he cared to admit. In 6 weeks, they were married under the cottonwood tree, Ella watching with folded arms and tight lips. At first, Amelia was everything Jake thought he'd needed. Elegant, smart, affectionate. She brought color to his life. Drapes in the parlor, imported teas, silver napkin rings for Sunday suppers. The ranch changed around her, and so did Jake. He bought new fencing, took out a larger loan for cattle expansion, even considered selling off the north pasture to finance a grain silo. Amelia spoke of growth, of legacy, of making something worthy of the Cartwright name. But her voice changed behind closed doors. "She watches everything," Amelia whispered about Ella. "It's like she's waiting for us to fail." Jake brushed it off at first. His mother was cautious, sure, but not cruel. "She doesn't want this place to change," Amelia said next. "She's stuck in the past. But this land needs to move forward, or it'll die." Jake didn't argue. He started to notice the little things. How Ella would linger by the ledger, how she hesitated when Amelia suggested new purchases, how her hand tightened just slightly when Jake mentioned the bank. One night, after supper, Amelia poured him whiskey and sat on his lap like she used to. Her voice was soft but insistent. "Your mother's in the way, Jake." You can't build a future with someone always dragging you back to the past. He didn't answer, but the seed had been planted. Over the next year, the house began to shift around invisible lines. Ella's name wasn't spoken at dinner. She ate earlier or later than they did, took her tea in the garden. She grew quieter, and Jake told himself she preferred it that way. But sometimes, in the still of night, he would wake to find her light still burning downstairs, the sound of papers rustling, a chair creaking slowly. Amelia said it was time. She needs to go, she said. It's not a question anymore, Jake. The ranch can't expand until we have control. Real control. Jake stared at the fireplace for a long time. She raised me, he said. She's strangling you, Amelia replied. You just don't see it yet. So he did what he thought he never could. He asked his mother to leave. He rehearsed the words for 3 days, practiced them in the barn with the horses as his only witnesses. I think it's time, he said to her finally, not meeting her eyes. You've earned your rest, Ma. Go see the country. Take some peace. I'll send money when you need it. Ella didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply packed a single suitcase, left her bedroom neat as a prayer, and waited on the porch with her hat in her lap. Don't forget to water the lilacs, she said quietly. Then she walked. Jake watched her go, heart heavy, unsure if he'd just become a man or lost the last part of one. Amelia stood beside him with a cool hand on his shoulder. She'll be better off, she said. Jake nodded, but part of him didn't believe it. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was what sat inside that battered suitcase, what it meant, what it would cost. The land beneath their boots wasn't theirs, not truly. And in that single act of exile, Jake had turned away the only person still holding it all together. The morning after Ella disappeared down the road, the ranch was silent in a way that felt wrong. Not just empty, hollow. Jake sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring through the window toward the cottonwood tree. The wind stirred the leaves, but nothing moved beneath it. She was gone. And with her, something unspoken had left the house. Amelia hummed as she cleaned the silver. She hadn't hummed in weeks. She moved with lightness, smiling to herself. Jake turned away. He didn't know why the coffee tasted bitter that morning, or why his stomach turned at the sound of her cheer. Around midday, as he went to replace a broken stirrup, Jake opened the piano bench to retrieve a strip of old cloth he kept there for cleaning leather. It was habit. He hadn't touched the piano in years, not since his father's death. Ella had played it sometimes, always at dusk, always alone. The lid creaked. Inside, atop the cloth, lay an envelope. Jake froze. His name was written across it in bold, familiar handwriting. Ella's. Not shaky, not soft, firm. Unafraid. He opened it with fingers that didn't feel like his own. Jacob, you think this ranch is yours. It's not. Your father left it to me in full, every acre, every head of cattle, every debt. I let you run it because I believed in you, because I loved you. But love has limits. I've paid the mortgage quietly every month for the last 6 years. Without me, the bank would have taken this place long ago. There's more you don't know. Before you go to the bank, ask Mr. Hollister. He'll tell you the rest. And Jacob, remember that what we inherit isn't always land or cattle. Sometimes it's the truth, whether we want it or not. Jake read the letter twice, then again. Then he rode to town like the devil was behind him. The notary's office sat next to the post station. Jake stormed in, boots loud on the worn pine floors. Mr. Hollister looked up, startled. Jacob Cartwright, Jake said. My mother said to ask you about the ranch. The old man's eyes softened. She left. Jake nodded. Hollister sighed, opened a drawer, and withdrew a thick file bound in twine. He placed it on the desk. She told me if you ever came, I was to show you everything. But I wasn't to interfere before. He untied the bundle. Inside were bank receipts, sign transfers, letters from Ella to the mortgage company. A trail of sacrifice 6 years long. Jake leaned in. $900 a month. Every month. Paid from an account he didn't know existed. She's kept this place afloat on her own, Hollister said. You haven't made a payment since '76. She covered everyone. Jake couldn't speak. There's more, Hollister added, sliding over a second envelope. She asked me to give you this. Inside were 2 items, a hand-drawn map marked with several names, and a silver key wrapped in velvet. You want to know the truth? The note read. Go to Ezra Blake, Carson Ridge, South Road. He'll explain. But come with open hands, Jacob, and an honest heart. That's the only way this ends well. Ezra Blake. Jake hadn't heard that name in 20 years. His uncle, his father's brother, banished after a bitter dispute over mineral rights no one ever proved existed. Ezra's alive? Jake whispered. Living in the hills, Hollister said. Your mother's been sending him letters, supplies, keeping quiet about it. Jake looked down at the letter again, then back at the map. Something inside him shifted. She hadn't just left. She'd orchestrated something, a test, a final reckoning. And he had failed the first part. Jake rode through the night. The trail to Carson Ridge was narrow, overgrown in places and nearly forgotten. Coyotes howled in the dark, and once, he thought he saw a mountain cat watching from the ridge. But he didn't stop. Not once. By dawn, he found the homestead. An old cabin sat nestled against a cliff, its roof patched with tin, smoke rising gently from the chimney. A horse was tied out front. Not the kind used for riding into town, but built for hauling. Jake dismounted quietly and approached the side window. Inside, he saw his mother. Ella sat at a rough-hewn table, speaking to a man whose face was lined with time and solitude. Ezra. Jake's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't just resting. She was conspiring. But her voice, muffled through the pain, was calm. He made his choice, Ella said. But every man deserves one chance to make it right. Ezra nodded slowly. On the table were documents, thick folders, banknotes, land deeds, and something more, mine records. Jake's eyes widened. The silver mine was real, and judging by the stacks of cash, it was still producing. Suddenly, everything made sense. The suitcase, the secrecy, the silence. This wasn't punishment. It was a test. Jake didn't knock. He didn't storm in. He walked around the house and stood in the clearing, waiting. After a moment, Ella stepped onto the porch, her eyes unreadable. I found the letter, he said. I figured you would. He looked past her to the door. May I come in? Ella studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You may. Inside, Ezra didn't rise from his chair, but he looked Jake over slowly, without bitterness. Raymond's boy, he said. You have his hands. Jake glanced at the documents spread across the table. This is why she left. No, Ella said. This is why I stayed quiet. The ranch was never yours, Jacob. But it could be, if you earn it. Jake sat down. I thought you were weak, he admitted. Just a woman in the way. I am a woman, Ella said. But I was never in the way. I was the reason it kept standing. Jake lowered his head. I'm sorry. Ezra reached across the table and placed a thick deed in front of him. Silver mine's real, profitable, and clean. No blood on it. Your mother and I invested early, when no one else believed. Jake swallowed. And the ranch. Ella handed him another paper, the deed to the land, signed over into her name years ago. It's mine, she said, but I'll sign it over to you, with one condition. Jake looked up. You walk away from Amelia, she said, today, and you never ask me for another dime until you've proven you can live without poison in your house. Jake nodded slowly. Done. The morning sun filtered through pine needles as Jake sat on the porch of Ezra's cabin. The silver mine deeds still clutched in his hands. They felt heavier than paper, heavier than any promise he'd ever made. Inside, Ella was packing up. Not hurried, not fearful, just steady, like someone who'd lived long enough to know that everything important comes with risk. Ezra poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to Jake without a word. The old man hadn't said much after the night before, but Jake sensed his silence was earned, not empty. I should have come sooner, Jake finally said. Ezra sipped from his own cup. You weren't ready. Jake nodded, accepting the truth. I thought Ma was just holding us back, that she didn't see the future. Turns out, she was keeping the past from devouring it. She saw everything, Ezra said. That's why she gave you the letter, to see if you'd follow the trail or bury it. Jake looked out at the horizon. The ridgeline cut sharp against the morning sky. He felt like he could see farther now, not just across land, but through time. I have to go back, he said. She gave me a choice. I made it, but it's not finished. Ezra glanced sideways at him. You're not taking the money? Not yet, Jake said. Not until I clean out what's poisoning the ranch. He stood, tucked the mine papers into his saddlebag, and slung it over his shoulder. Tell her I'll be back. Ezra gave a rare, slow nod. Don't wait too long. Jake saddled his horse and turned down the trail, dust rising behind him. The ride back to Carson Creek was faster. Purpose lent speed to his hands, and clarity quieted the doubts that used to ride alongside him. By the time the sun dipped behind the western hills, Jake crested the ridge overlooking the ranch. Everything looked the same from a distance. The barns, the house, the fence line running like scars across the land. But he knew better now. Amelia was on the porch when he rode up, her dress crisp, her hair tied back like it had been the day they married. She smiled wide, sweet. Too sweet. You came back, she said, stepping forward. I knew you would. Jake dismounted slowly. We need to talk. She tilted her head. About what? He didn't answer, just walked inside. Everything was clean, polished to perfection. But it felt cold. Lifeless. Where's the ledger? He asked. Amelia followed him in, her voice honeyed. Why? I want to see the accounts. She froze just slightly, enough for Jake to notice. You've never asked before. I'm asking now. She hesitated, then moved to the drawer near the desk and pulled out the leather-bound book. Jake took it, opened to the most recent entries, and ran his finger down the columns. It didn't add up. He flipped backward, scanning months of purchases, new saddles, imported feed, custom furniture from Cheyenne. You said we couldn't afford to hire more help, he said. Said we were barely keeping up. We were, she replied. Jake turned to face her. So where'd the money come from, Amelia? Her expression cracked for just a second. Then she smiled again, smaller this time. What difference does it make? We're thriving now. No, Jake said. You're thriving. My mother's been paying the mortgage behind our backs. $900 a month. 6 years. Amelia didn't answer. And I know about the silver, Jake added. About the mine. Her smile vanished. You went to her, she said. After everything. She gave me a chance to do the right thing, Jake said. And I'm taking it. Amelia folded her arms. We don't need her. We can wait her out. Old women don't live forever. Jake recoiled like she'd struck him. You knew, he whispered. You knew what she was doing. And you said nothing. Amelia's eyes narrowed. I did what was necessary, she said. This ranch needed freedom. Your mother had her hands in everything, even after all these years. She kept us alive, Jake said. She saved everything. And I threw her out because of you. Amelia stepped closer. You're not throwing it all away over guilt, are you? Jake met her gaze. If I choose you, I lose the ranch, the mine, my name. And if I choose her, I have to send you away forever. Silence fell between them like a blade. She smiled one last time, brittle, desperate. You won't. Jake turned toward the door. I already have. He packed her trunk himself, folded her dresses, wrapped the silver, laid each item with care. Not out of love, but out of finality. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She just stood on the porch as the wagon arrived, driven by old Tom Avery, who worked for the post station. Jake handed him a coin purse. Take her to Cheyenne. Make sure she gets on the rail. Tom nodded, eyes flicking to Amelia, then to Jake. He understood. Amelia climbed into the wagon without a word. At the last moment, she turned. You'll regret this, she said. Men always do, when they pick blood over ambition. Jake didn't answer. The wagon rolled away. Dust rose behind it, then settled. And Jake stood alone in the silence that followed. Not empty this time, but clean. Honest. Jake Cartwright stood on the porch of the ranch house, the evening wind brushing against his face like a warning. The silence that followed Amelia's departure felt different now. No longer bitter, but taut, expectant. He had cut the cord that bound him to deception. But truth doesn't come without consequences. He moved through the house slowly, touching the walls, the chairs, the stove. Everything Ella had built, preserved, protected. The stillness of the place began to settle over him like dust. He breathed it in. He wasn't just living in a house anymore. He was living in a reckoning. The next day, word began to travel. Carson Creek was a small town. People noticed when the banker's daughter took a wagon out of town without saying goodbye. Rumors followed. Some said Jake had sent his wife away for spending too much. Others whispered he'd found out about something darker. The most persistent gossip claimed Amelia was the brains behind the ranch, and now Jake would drown without her. Jake didn't respond to any of it. He went to the bank alone that morning, papers in hand. The deeds from Ella, the ledgers, the final mortgage payments made under her name. He laid them down before the manager like cards at a poker table. Mr. Shetland, a thin man with wire spectacles and a habit of blinking too often, read in silence for almost 15 minutes. Finally, he cleared his throat. This changes everything. Jake didn't blink. That's the idea. You're the legal heir now? I am. And the mine. Jake tapped the page with the seal. Backed by 3 notaries and 2 bank inspectors. Shetland adjusted his glasses, then looked Jake over as if seeing him for the first time. You do realize, Mr. Cartwright, that your wife's family has deep ties with some interested parties. Jake raised an eyebrow. Such as? Shetland didn't answer directly. Instead, he closed the folder with a soft thud. Just be careful, he said. Money's like a river. It runs smooth until someone builds a dam where it doesn't belong. Jake left the bank with a weight in his chest. Something was moving beneath the surface. He had stirred waters that had been calm for too long, but calm for the wrong reasons. At the post office, he received a letter without a return name. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside, you think you've claimed your land, but she promised that silver to others. They'll come for it. You'll wish you hadn't opened that suitcase. No signature, just a folded page of an old map, with a red X, marked in the hills beyond Carson Ridge. Jake took the note to the sheriff. But the sheriff wasn't in. Jake left it on his desk and rode back to the ranch. That night, a shadow crossed the edge of his property. He caught sight of it near the west fence. Just a flicker of movement, too fast to be an animal. He grabbed his rifle, saddled up, and rode to the ridge. First, nothing. Then he saw it, a fire. Small, hidden between 2 large stones near the creek. And beside it, 2 horses and 3 men. They were speaking low, but the words carried in the cold air. Said he sent her off with the cash. Fool believes she gave it to him straight. We give it 3 days. Then we torch the place and take the mine. Jake crept closer, rage rising with every word. The 3rd man spoke now, his voice colder, older. He's got until Sunday. Then the Cartwrights are finished. Jake recognized the voice. Gerald Ashcombe, Amelia's cousin. He'd always called himself a businessman. Rode in for holidays and left before the dishes were done. Ella never liked him. Jake waited until they bedded down, then rode back in silence, heart hammering. The danger was real. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about survival. The next morning, Jake rode back to Ezra's cabin. He found Ella in the garden, pulling weeds from under a patch of wild lavender. Her hands were steady. I know, she said without turning. Jake stopped in his tracks. You heard. I know the Ashcombes. I know what promises Amelia made without your name on the paper. Jake sat beside her. They're planning to burn the ranch. Ella nodded. Because you didn't just take the money. You took back the name. He looked down. They said Sunday. Then we have 3 days. Ezra was already packing when Jake walked inside. "I built that mine with sweat and quiet," he said. "Now it's time someone defended it with truth." Jake stared at his uncle. "You're willing to fight?" Ezra paused. "I spent 20 years hiding from a brother I couldn't forgive. But your mother forgave me. That counts for more than silver." Jake helped him gather supplies, tools, rope, old rifles, a crate of mining charges. They loaded the wagon and rode down the ridge together. Back at the ranch, Jake and Ezra worked without rest. They reinforced the barn, secured the house, and dug trenches where water lines had gone dry, traps for riders who might come fast. Ella returned that evening with a wagon load of townsfolk. Old Tom, the blacksmith's widow, even 2 young hands who used to work under Jake. "They came because of her," Ezra said, watching the volunteers unpack food and tools. "Not because of you." "I know," Jake said, and he was grateful for it. Saturday passed in a blur of hammering, drilling, fortifying. On Sunday morning, the sky turned gray. Thunder growled in the distance. Jake stood at the ranch gate, eyes fixed on the horizon. They came just after noon. 6 riders. Ashcombe at the front, wearing a brown coat and an expression like rusted iron. Behind him, hired guns. The kind that kill before they ask your name. Jake stepped forward, unarmed. Ashcombe stopped his horse 20 feet away. "Well," he said, "you made your choice." "I did." "You sure about that?" Jake looked behind him. At Ezra standing tall in the doorway. At Ella sitting in her rocking chair, calm as ever. "Yeah," Jake said. "I'm sure." Ashcombe smiled. "Burn it, boys." The first shot rang out from the barn loft, Ezra's rifle. One of the riders went down hard, hitting the dust in silence. Then chaos. Jake dove for cover as the guns roared. Smoke filled the yard. Townsfolk held their line, crouched behind fences. 2 of them had hunting rifles, another had a shovel. They fought not because they were soldiers, but because Ella had taught them what the land meant. Ashcombe rode hard for the house. Jake met him at the front steps. They collided like thunder. Ashcombe raised his pistol, but Ella was faster. A single shot cracked through the air. Ashcombe tumbled off his horse, clutching his side. Jake turned to his mother. She lowered the smoking revolver. "You were aiming for his hand," Jake said. "I missed," she said flatly. Ashcombe groaned in the dirt. Jake leaned down. "Leave now," he said, "or I bury you right here." The remaining men scattered. It was over. By sundown, silence had reclaimed the land. The echo of gunfire had faded into the hills, replaced by the low murmur of wind brushing through the dry cottonwood leaves. Smoke rose in thin ribbons from the hay barn, where embers had licked the beams before being stomped out by Tom and the blacksmith's widow. Jake Cartwright stood on the porch with a rifle in one hand and ash on his boots. His shirt clung to him with sweat and dirt, but his heartbeat had slowed. He looked over what remained, the yard trampled by horses, the splintered gate, the blood drying in the dust. They had come for his land, his mine, his name, and they'd failed. Ezra sat on the porch rail, cleaning his rifle in steady motions. Not triumphant, just tired. Behind them, Ella Carver swept broken glass into a dustpan without a word. She moved like a woman restoring order after a storm, not just to her house but to her son's life. Jake turned to her, finally breaking the silence. "I didn't expect it to end like this." Ella didn't look up. "It never ends, Jacob. It just gets quiet for a while." He nodded slowly, watching the broom glide across the porch. "She told them we were dead weight," he murmured. Ella's hand paused. "And now," he looked out over the land. The scars on it, the dust-colored sky that always made him think of his father. "Now I think I was the one weighing it down." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Inside the house, the fire crackled gently in the hearth. Jake leaned over the kitchen table as Ezra laid out the documents. Clean, crisp papers stamped and sealed. The deed to the ranch, the ownership of the silver mine, notarized statements and back payments, each one a ledger of sacrifice. Ella stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her apron. "The land is yours now. By name. By law." Jake stared at the stack. I don't know if I deserve it. Ezra gave a dry chuckle. Deserves got nothing to do with it. Nobody ever really owns land, Jacob. You just get to decide what it becomes while you're on it. Jake's fingers hovered over the papers. How long were you planning this? Ella stepped forward. Since your father died. I didn't want you to carry his burdens before you were ready. But I also didn't want you to waste what he left behind. Jake's jaw tightened. I nearly did. But you didn't, she said. He lifted the top paper and read it slowly, then placed it back in the folder. I thought inheritance meant cattle, fences, a roof. I didn't know it meant trust. It means all those things, Ella said gently. But mostly it means remembering who you are, even when it hurts. Jake looked up at her, his eyes shadowed with regret. I sent you away. She stepped closer. And then you came back. That doesn't fix it. No, she said. But it shows you want to. They stood there, not as mother and son, but as two people who had each carried too much alone, and finally decided to carry it together. Ezra closed the case and pushed it toward Jake. You've got what's yours now. Make it worth something. Jake nodded, taking the case like a man accepting both crown and burden. Later, when the house had gone quiet, Jake found himself standing at the piano. Dust lay thick across the lid. He reached out, brushed it clean with the side of his hand. You still play? He asked softly. Ella, sitting nearby, smiled faintly. Only when I miss your father. What did you used to play at night? He asked. When I was a boy? Her fingers moved slowly, thoughtfully over the keys. A hymn, an old one. Not many remember it now. Jake sat beside her. Play it for me. She did. The melody filled the room, soft and haunting. It wrapped around the firelight like a promise of memory, of forgiveness, of something stronger than blood. Jake closed his eyes. He saw the cottonwood tree in spring, the way his father had stood tall against the sky, the way Ella had wept quietly and then wiped her hands and gone back to work. He saw Amelia's cold smile, and Ezra's tired strength. And then he saw something new, a ranch not divided by suspicion, but bound by resolve. A house not filled with silence, but purpose. A life still wounded but healing. When the final note faded, Jake opened his eyes. You ever think it'd end like this? He asked. Ella gave a small, sad smile. I never thought it would end at all. Not really. I just hoped you'd come back before it did. Jake looked at her. I'm back. She reached out and took his hand, the one that had held a rifle that morning and now simply trembled. Then let's talk about Silver. 3 months later, the ranch was quiet again, but in a different way. Not hollow, not cold, just peaceful. The cottonwood tree behind the house was heavy with summer leaves. A new coat of whitewash brightened the walls. Fences stood firm. The cattle were fat. The windmill creaked like it remembered the old days, but didn't miss them much. Jake Cartwright stood on the porch with a mug of coffee in his hands. Not strong coffee. Not the kind you drink to survive the morning. The kind you sip when you've got time. Down in the yard, his mother knelt in her garden, tending a neat row of tomatoes and squash. Her straw hat shaded her silver hair, and her hands worked the earth like they still remembered its secrets. Ezra was by the barn, showing a hired boy how to oil a saddle. Both men laughed at something Jake couldn't hear, a sound that warmed the air more than the sun. The mine sent monthly deliveries now. Silver, hauled in quiet wagons to the Carson Ridge Bank, handled under Ezra's name and shielded from the Ashcombs and their kind. Jake had refused to expand it, refused to turn it into a quarry or chase greed. There's already more wealth in the ground than I'll ever need, he'd said. And Ella had smiled. Then maybe now, she'd replied, you'll find what you actually need. Jake finished his coffee and walked out to the edge of the porch. The breeze lifted his shirt gently. He could smell bread baking, hear birds, see the horse herd grazing across the ridge. He thought back to the night he found Ella's letter. He thought back to the look in Amelia's eyes when she realized he'd changed. And then he thought of that battered suitcase, of what it held and what it meant. Not the money, the mercy, the chance to do better. That had been the real inheritance. He understood that now. Not the land, not the silver, not even the ranch, but the strength to rebuild something he'd nearly destroyed, not with bullets or fire, but by forgetting what love was supposed to look like. Love wasn't loud. It didn't demand. It didn't manipulate. It waited. It gave. It forgave. He watched his mother move gently among the plants, and knew. She had waited. She had given. And she had forgiven. Jake stepped off the porch, heading toward the garden. He had a fence to mend, and then a meeting with the town council about using part of the mine's profits for a school. After that, he'd ride to Hollister's to sign a deed transferring 10 acres to the widow who lost her house in last year's flood. He smiled as he walked. His father used to say a man's worth was measured by how he left the land after he was gone. Jake wasn't gone yet, but now he was ready to start leaving something behind. Something good, something clean, and maybe, just maybe, something that would last longer than silver.